The sun was just beginning its descent over Sacramento, spilling warm hues of amber and gold across the city's skyline. Marcus Rivers, having wrapped up a long day at a bustling law office downtown, eased his sleek sedan onto the quiet suburban streets. The soft hum of his car, mixed with the gentle strains of his favorite jazz station, set a soothing backdrop as he looked forward to a peaceful evening at home. As Marcus approached a busy intersection, he noted the traffic light turning yellow. With his practiced reflexes, he decelerated smoothly. But before the light could turn fully red, a burst of flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. A siren's wail cut through the evening air, and Marcus instinctively pulled over to the side of the road. Moments later, the driver's side window slid down as a tall, square-jawed officer stepped out. Officer Stephen Harris, mid-30s with a neatly trimmed haircut and a badge that gleamed in the dying sunlight, strode confidently toward Marcus's vehicle. His uniform, crisp and authoritative, seemed to demand compliance even before any words were exchanged. "License and registration, please," Harris said in a clipped tone, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Marcus reached into the glove compartment with a calm precision born of years of professionalism. He handed over his documents with deliberate care, all the while noticing the subtle, scrutinizing gaze of the officer. After a moment of tense silence, Harris leaned in slightly. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, the question hanging in the warm air. Marcus met the officer's gaze steadily. "I believe I was a bit slow at the intersection," he admitted evenly, though his mind raced as he studied the officer's shifting demeanor. Harris's eyes narrowed, and his tone took on a sharper edge. "You didn't come to a full stop. And tell me, you're not from around here, are you?" His question was laced with an underlying suspicion that Marcus could not ignore. "Actually, I moved here a few months ago," Marcus replied, his voice calm but guarded. "My license should have that information." Yet, it was clear that Harris wasn't solely interested in the mundane details of a traffic stop. There was a personal agenda lurking behind his questions, a bias that Marcus recognized all too well. The atmosphere inside the car thickened as Harris's gaze hardened. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" he pressed, his voice rising just a fraction. "Home," Marcus answered, maintaining his composure despite the growing tension. It wasn't a question of where he was going. It was about the implications behind it. Harris's posture shifted, as if the minor infraction had morphed into something far more significant. Without further explanation, Harris folded Marcus's documents with an exaggerated slowness, then tucked them into his chest pocket. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice firm and unyielding. Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened momentarily, but his face remained impassive. He opened the door and stepped out, standing tall and dignified in his tailored suit, a stark contrast to the rougher edge of his surroundings. Harris's eyes roamed over him, the scrutiny now tinged with a mix of suspicion and something more personal. "Place your hands on the hood, please," Harris instructed, gesturing toward the front of Marcus's car. "I need to check for weapons." Marcus arched an eyebrow, his tone coolly incredulous. "Weapons? I beg your pardon, officer. Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" His calm question seemed to catch Harris off guard, the tension in the air now punctuated by an unspoken challenge. Harris's jaw clenched as he stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt. "I'm not going to ask twice," he said, his tone edged with impatience. In one swift motion, he moved to pat down Marcus, his hands rough and intrusive. Marcus felt every moment of the invasive search, but his expression never wavered. He simply remained composed, his inner resolve unbroken. After a brief, tense moment, Harris stepped back, muttering under his breath, "You're clean." His admission, laced with irritation, betrayed the frustration of a man who felt his authority slipping away. Marcus turned to face him, his eyes cool and steady. "If you're finished, then so am I," he said quietly, his voice a mix of calm and determination. Harris's eyes narrowed further as he took a step closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "You seem to know a lot about your rights," Harris spat out, his tone a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. Care to explain why? Marcus folded his arms, his stance relaxed but resolute. I've had my fair share of encounters with law enforcement, he replied evenly. I know my rights and the laws better than most. Ah, so you're a lawyer then? Harris sneered, clearly irritated by Marcus's unflappable demeanor. A faint, almost enigmatic smile crossed Marcus's lips. Let's just say I've spent enough time in the system to understand its inner workings, he answered ambiguously. His measured tone served as both a reminder and a challenge. Harris's face flushed with anger, and he stepped even closer, lowering his voice to a near growl. You think you're smarter than me? You think you can just talk your way out of this? Marcus met his gaze unflinchingly. I don't think I'm smarter, officer. I simply believe in fairness. His words, quiet but charged with meaning, cut through the mounting hostility like a knife. For a long, heavy moment, the two men stood face to face, the evening air filled with tension and the unspoken weight of their histories. Finally, Marcus's next words hung in the air, altering the course of the encounter forever. Officer, I think it's time you know who I am. Harris's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment, the aggressive veneer faltered. I'm not interested in your name, he snapped, though the underlying tremor betrayed his discomfort. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, a stark contrast to the rough impatience of the officer before him. With a quiet click, he produced a small, leather-bound wallet. Flipping it open, he revealed a gleaming badge that shone with an unmistakable authority. Marcus Rivers, he stated calmly, head of internal affairs for the Sacramento Police Department. The world seemed to pause. Harris's eyes darted from the badge back to Marcus's steady face, a mix of shock and dawning realization washing over him. His hand, which had been twitching near his belt, fell slowly to his side. You, internal affairs? Harris managed, his voice cracking as he struggled to regain composure. Marcus's tone softened slightly, yet retained an edge of unyielding authority. Yes, I oversee officer conduct, ensuring that every badge represents integrity, fairness, and respect. Today, your actions have fallen short of that standard. Harris's face paled as the full gravity of the situation sank in. The dynamic had shifted irreversibly. What began as a routine traffic stop had evolved into a moment of accountability that Harris had never expected. This isn't just about a traffic violation, Marcus continued, his voice measured yet piercing. It's about the way you've treated me, and by extension, the way you treat everyone who doesn't fit your preconceived notion of who deserves respect. For a moment, silence reigned as Harris struggled with his conscience. Finally, Marcus took a step closer, his presence both commanding and compassionate. Return my documents, officer, he ordered, and think carefully about your actions moving forward. With trembling hands and a voice barely above a whisper, Harris fumbled through his pockets and handed back Marcus's license and registration. The officer's earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving behind only a heavy burden of regret and uncertainty. Marcus retrieved his documents and, with one final, steadying look at Harris, returned to his car. As he started the engine and drove away, he called out, "Remember, officer, this badge isn't a symbol of superiority. It's a commitment to accountability." Later that night, in the quiet confines of his office at Internal Affairs, Marcus sat before a glowing computer screen, his mind replaying every moment of the encounter. The file on Officer Harris was open before him, a dossier filled with minor complaints, reports of excessive stops, and vague accusations that had never been properly addressed. It was a stark reminder that Harris was not an anomaly, but rather a symptom of a deeper issue within the department. Determined not to let this incident be swept under the rug, Marcus began compiling a comprehensive review of internal misconduct cases. His phone buzzed, a reminder of a meeting with the department's chief. With a deep breath, he gathered the files, knowing that tonight marked the beginning of a much larger battle for reform. The next morning, the early sunlight filtered through the blinds of the Sacramento Police Department's conference room. Marcus sat across from Chief Evelyn Daniels, a seasoned veteran with salt and pepper hair, and a reputation for no-nonsense leadership. As Marcus recounted the events of the previous evening, Daniels listened intently, her expression grave. "It wasn't just a routine stop," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It was a moment that revealed a pattern of behavior, an abuse of authority driven by prejudice. Officer Harris isn't the first, and sadly, won't be the last if we don't address the culture within our ranks." Chief Daniels leaned forward, rubbing her temples thoughtfully. "I'm aware of some of Harris's past incidents, but we've always handled them quietly. Disciplining him publicly could create a lot of friction." Marcus's eyes blazed with determination. "Quiet fixes problems in the moment, but silence lets them fester. We owe it to the community and ourselves to be transparent. I propose a department-wide review, an overhaul of our training, protocols, and accountability systems. If we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, how can we ever expect the public to trust us?" Chief Daniels studied him for a long moment. "You're going to ruffle some feathers with this, aren't you?" Marcus nodded firmly. "Yes. It's time we stop sweeping these issues under the rug. We need to ensure that every officer understands that this badge stands for integrity and fairness, not unchecked authority." Over the following weeks, Marcus spearheaded a series of rigorous meetings, interviews, and community forums. He gathered data from countless reports, held candid discussions with fellow officers, and invited community members to share their experiences. The narrative that had begun with a single traffic stop was now transforming into a catalyst for a comprehensive reform effort within the department. Meanwhile, Officer Harris was summoned for an internal hearing. The hearing room buzzed with tension as Marcus sat across from Harris, whose previously defiant demeanor had now crumbled into one of regret and uncertainty. As Harris faced a panel of senior officers, Marcus observed every detail, each twitch, every faltering glance. Knowing that this process was not about personal vengeance, but about enforcing accountability and setting a precedent for change. The hearing concluded with a suspension for Harris, a disciplinary action that, while only a small step, symbolized a commitment to rooting out systemic issues. Marcus was fully aware that one suspension would not heal a broken system, but it was a necessary start. He planned to use this incident as a springboard for broader reforms, and to ensure that every officer was held to the highest standards of professionalism and respect. A few months later, at a community event held in a local town hall, Marcus stood at a podium before an audience of officers, city officials, and local residents. The room was filled with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope as Marcus addressed the crowd. "I stand before you not as an adversary, but as someone who believes that justice is more than just catching the bad actors. It's about ensuring that every interaction between law enforcement and the community is founded on respect and accountability," Marcus declared, his voice resonant and clear. "Today, we reaffirm that our badge is not a shield for prejudice, but a symbol of our duty to serve with integrity." His words, measured and heartfelt, stirred the audience. Applause filled the room, not just as a reaction to his speech, but as a hopeful promise of change. In that moment, Marcus felt a profound responsibility, not just to discipline those who abused their power, but to rebuild a culture that would prevent such abuses from occurring in the future. As the event drew to a close, Marcus stepped down from the podium and mingled with community members. Some approached him with gratitude, others with lingering doubts, but all were united in the belief that accountability and transparency were essential for the healing of the community. Driving home that evening, Marcus reflected on the twists of fate that had turned a routine traffic stop into a turning point, not only in one officer's career, but in the broader trajectory of the entire department. The encounter with Officer Harris had exposed deep-rooted flaws, but it had also ignited a movement toward reform, one that Marcus was determined to see through. In the soft glow of his car's interior lights, Marcus resolved that every day would be a step toward a system where every citizen was treated with dignity and every officer was held accountable. It wasn't an easy path, and change would not come overnight, but as long as he held on to the belief that justice and fairness were worth fighting for, there was hope on the horizon. And so, in the twilight of that Sacramento evening, as the city settled into quiet contemplation, a new chapter in law enforcement accountability began. one built on the unwavering conviction that true authority is earned through integrity, not intimidation.